Welcome to the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. Whether you are a seasoned professional or a first-time fundraiser, we have the advice you need to take your next step toward major gift mastery. I'm your host, Tom Dauber, President of Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting.
Well, good morning. This is Tom Dauber. It's morning at the time of this recording. I am here with my classmate from Bowling Green State University and an old longtime friend, Phil Washburn, who's the president and CEO of the Furniture Bank of Central Ohio. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here with you.
Well, Phil, as I usually say, this is a fundraising show, and we're certainly going to talk about fundraising. You're a CEO, though. You do some different things. Your vision of the nonprofit world is a lot broader than that of just a regular major gift officer. But I know you got major gift chops too. So we're going to want you to talk about all that stuff today. But before we get into those sorts of things, could you tell our audience a little bit about how you like to spend your free time, what you do with yourself when you're not leading a nonprofit?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. And I think, anybody who's been out there, and when you step into a CEO role, that word free time becomes a little bit more of something that you dream about and think about versus actually have. But yeah, I have a lot of things that I spend my time with. Obviously, my family. I have a great relationship with my family. I have two daughters, and we really enjoy spending a lot of time together. And so, if I'm not at work, that's one of the big places I'm going to be. Is spending time with my kids, playing games, watching shows, talking about life, and taking our dog for a walk and doing those sorts of things. But outside of that, I'm very involved in my church. I sit on the board there and spend quite a bit of time serving in that capacity. I teach at my church and in other capacities as well. And then finally, if I do have a little bit of moment, I'm a bit of a DIYer. I'm always working on my house, working on my yard, my garden, woodworking, building furniture, doing something like that. So unfortunately, that doesn't happen nearly as much as I would prefer, but it's still a passion. It's still something that maybe when my head hits the pillow at night, I think about it, and there will be a day when I get to do a little bit more of that kind of stuff.
Well, since you brought it up, and I know we've got a lot of things to cover today, but you talked about how being a CEO is something that keeps you really busy, and it does cut into your free time. How do you maintain balance, like healthy balance, between your role as the CEO of your nonprofit and being a dad, being a husband, being a friend, being a member of your church? How do you balance all that stuff? Because I'll bet a lot of our listeners struggle with that very thing. We'd love to hear how you're successful at it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's really balance per se, but it's, it is having to make hard choices at times. It's definitely sacrifice, so there's, things that I would love to do personally, but I know that there's other demands of my time. And so I'm going to choose to maybe set aside, my preferences. But I think first and foremost, I'm really motivated by leading by example for my team. And I want my team to have a healthy work-life balance. And so if I'm constantly, shooting them emails at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night or texting them my thoughts, I'm demonstrating really poor behavior that I don't want them to exhibit. I want them to be able to have that break. And so it's really being intentional that, when I get to a certain point of the day, I'm shutting it down. And even though I feel like, man, there's more things that need to be done, well, it'll be there at 7 o'clock the next morning and I can jump back into it, And so I think it's just a choice that has to be made to say, hey, there are other things that need my time right now. And I want to really model that kind of, healthy boundaries to my team. And so that's really a big part of it. And then it helps that I have a wife that's very understanding, but also says, hey, it's time for you to be home, and reminds me when I need to turn off that part of my brain that's constantly thinking about, something with work and be engaged and present with my family.
Wow. It's great to have a wife or any spouse really in our lives that can help keep us on track, right? Because I know I benefit from that as well. Well, so I appreciate you jumping ahead there a little bit with answering that question. But I'd love to hear, before we get into more of them, what's your nonprofit origin story? How did you become the nonprofit leader you are today?
Yeah, that's a funny question. I would say, I didn't, obviously, like a lot of folks who end up in the nonprofit space, I wasn't looking to enter the nonprofit world. When you and I were in college, I was studying biology, pre-med, and I was getting a little worn out with the academic life and a little burned out, and had an opportunity to go and serve as a missionary in Mexico. And, took that opportunity to kind of evaluate where I was at in my journey, but also to have a positive impact in the lives of folks outside of America. And so that was my first, kind of foray into the nonprofit space, learning kind of the uniquenesses of the nonprofit sector. And pretty much outside of about a 2-year hiatus where I was in the public sector, or the private sector, I should say, trying to pay down my student loans. Most of my career has been in the nonprofit space, and what's interesting about it is, I've done everything. As far as I've been a development person and done fundraising, I've done programs, I've done operations, and now I'm a CEO, and so. I've enjoyed being able to use kind of all of my talents, however they come out and express themselves in the nonprofit space, to be able to benefit, the folks in the community that we're serving.
That's wonderful. Now, what was the step? What was the moment where you're like, ooh, I think I could be a CEO? Obviously, you applied for a job. And you built up some career. I know you spent a long time with Habitat and some other organizations. But when was the moment where you thought, hey, I would really love to be the person kind of guiding the ship?
That's an interesting question as well. I think it's been a journey for that as well. I've always been, I think, a natural leader. Throughout most of my life, folks have looked at me as a leader. I'm an Eagle Scout. I kind of demonstrate some of that leadership ability. And so when I was on that first team in Mexico, I was asked to be the team leader. And that was really my baptism by fire of really having a team that was looking to me to make decisions, to lead and guide them. And honestly, it was rough. It wasn't a great experience. And in fact, my second year down there, they asked me to lead again, and I said no. I said I need to not lead. I think there was somebody else on the team that I thought was a better leader, and I said I'll be happy to be kind of their number two, and be able to support their leadership and come alongside of them and really feel freed up to lead in the best way that I know how. And so for a good long time, that was kind of the trajectory I kind of had. Is I really enjoyed being that kind of number two person, coming alongside of the senior leader, whatever team I was on, and really supporting and elevating their leadership. And then I was at a nonprofit, here in Columbus, about 14 years ago now. And I was the director of operations. I was providing a lot of support on the operations side of things, and I was supporting the CEO, who was the founder of the organization. And I go on vacation, and I come back, and the board lets me know that the CEO resigned, and that I was in charge. I was the interim CEO, and so all of a sudden I'm back in this position where I'm leading. And I found that, over the years and just working under someone else's leadership, I really kind of had started to hone my own style of leadership and approach. I learned the things that I wanted to do and emulate, and also learned some of the ways that maybe I would want to do things differently. And so during that season where I was the interim, I really got to start to put some of those things in place. But I think there was always still this nagging, I think you're still a better number two, a person. And so when I stepped away from that role, kind of found myself back again into, started back actually in fundraising for a little bit and working my way up. And what really kind of got me to the point where I'm like, yeah, I think I can be a CEO was when all of my peers around me really started saying, hey, you should be in leadership here. You should be the one, providing the leadership that we need as an organization. And so when you start having your peers really kind of see that in you and call that out, it starts to get you to the point where you start to believe it yourself. And so when I started getting phone calls, and there was a season prior to me taking this role where, I got 4 or 5, phone calls from different folks wanting me to come and be a CEO. You start to realize, okay, the folks are recognizing this in me, whether I see it or not. They're recognizing the ability here. And so I need to take that seriously and really believe that I can provide the kind of leadership that an organization needs.
Phil, you've done your fair share of fundraising over the years, but you do so much more than that. Tell us a bit about the differences you see between major gift officers versus president and CEO types, especially like what makes a great major gift officer versus what makes a great CEO?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think a lot of it, there's a lot of overlap, right? A good CEO has to be a major gift officer. That's such an important part of my role, is ensuring our major donors are being stewarded properly and are being cared for, that we're thinking strategically about that relationship. But, at the same time, I'm constantly being pulled in a lot of other different directions. So my strategic mind has to kind of, compartmentalize. I can't just focus on the major gifts component because I have a lot of other departments that are, needing me to think strategically and to be able to focus intently on what they need. And so I would say one of the big, differences is there are some folks who would really struggle being able to kind of divide their strategic mind amongst all of the different tasks and the different areas. And so having to think strategically about a donor and then turn to, some sort of operations decision and then an HR, decision and maybe a big programmatic decision. And to be able to, think very clearly at each of those different stages. I know that, some folks that they focus in on one thing and they're going to be really good and really strategic about that one area, but would struggle with the demands that maybe a CEO role would put on their minds and being able to kind of think in a lot of different categories, all, within rapid succession.
Tom Dauber here for Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. Fundraising can be hard work, and it can be hard to mentally get into the place you need to be in order to see new opportunities. Everyone struggles with it. We are like the fish in the fishbowl who just can't see the water they're swimming in. That's when having outside expertise comes in handy. For 25 years, I've been helping nonprofits analyze their challenges, discover new ways forward, and develop clear plans that lead to greater fundraising revenues. Now I am available to help your organization develop the abundant vision it needs to inspire new levels of philanthropy at your nonprofit as well. Check out abundantvision.net to start your journey toward greater fundraising success today. Now, back to the show. No, that's a really great point. I don't know that I would want to be the guy having to juggle all the balls that you do. Fundraising's, I think, enough for me. Given your perspective as a leader with that broader vision, how do you think about fundraising in a way that's maybe different than your director of development?
Well, I think the maybe the difference is that because I'm so connected to all of the other aspects of the organization, I might be able to think about the donor relationship from a bigger picture perspective. And so there are aspects of, of what we do that I might be aware of that might resonate with the donor, that our director of development doesn't really have the time to dig into every aspect of what we do as an organization. And she does a great job of learning, what we're doing and being involved. But at the same time, she has a department to run and a lot of other, responsibilities. And so my perspective is just going to be broader because of just my day-to-day involvement and everything. And so I think that perspective comes out in how I might approach a specific donor. And we've seen it where, we're having a conversation around, well, what's our next step with this donor? And I might throw out an idea because of something that I'm seeing going on in the organization. And my director of development be like, that's it. I wouldn't have thought of that, but that's totally the approach to take. And it's only because I have I think a more holistic view of the organization that it's just not possible for my director of development to fully grasp and do, their job, the best that they can.
It sounds like you have a good relationship with your director of development. That's a real boon for any nonprofit to have a close relationship between their CEO and their fundraiser.
Absolutely. I mean, their office is right next door. We can literally talk through the walls to each other. We don't have a lot of set meetings because all day long we're in and out of each other's office, bouncing ideas, asking questions, checking in with each other. And that relationship is obviously one of the more important relationships in an organization because we have to be pulling in the same direction, right? They're living in the development world all day long, but I'm kind of jumping in and jumping out of it throughout the day. And so if I can't kind of jump in and be pulling in the same direction, really elevating their work, then, we're going to be causing a lot of conflict. We're going to be causing a lot of, really wasted time and effort. If we're not in alignment and we're pulling against each other, it's going to come out in how we interact with those donors. It's going to come out in just the overall results of the organization.
I guess I would ask too, what is your average amount of time per week that you spend on fundraising?
It depends on the week, but I would say it's probably around 8 to 10 hours a week is what I'm trying to put into that. And that's going to be a mix of, doing direct donor work, donor meetings, to thinking strategically, to talking to my development team and helping them to strategize and plan. And so kind of, there's it ebbs and flows too, as we've been going through a capital campaign that obviously adds, some time to it, but it's probably around 20 to 25% of my time.
Got it. Yeah, that sounds about right. So as a leader, and maybe it is the timepiece, I don't know, but what fundraising challenges are you finding yourself out presently running up against?
Yeah, that is really the big challenge is there's a lot of things, vying for the attention. And if I don't prioritize making those donor calls, spending time and, in strategic thinking around those relationships, it's easy for other responsibilities to creep in, And so like one of the things I always try to do is anybody who gives over $500, I try to give them a personal call. And, that takes a lot of time and, it may be, 100 to 200 calls a year, but, if every one of them answers, and even if we only talk for 5 to 10 minutes, that's a pretty significant investment of time, but it's something that I believe is critical and is important to the health of our whole development strategy. And so that's a big challenge. The other thing I think that, and this is just, I think globally an issue within the nonprofit community is we're increasingly seeing a lot of new nonprofits come online, which is great, doing a lot of really great work. But you're seeing, just more competition for the same philanthropic dollars. And so you have to be a lot more creative. Another thing we're seeing is donors being really focused in on very specific causes or specific impacts that they're looking for. And so sometimes it takes creativity to help that donor see maybe how you are involved in that. And so it just means extra work, right? And so it's not as simple as going in and talking about the mission, but it's helping to connect the dots on how the mission might be in alignment with some of their philanthropic goals. And so I think that all contributes to it's just a challenging I think fundraising environment right now.
Now, without getting too political, this is definitely not a oriented podcast. I know there's some changes going on at the federal level and the way funding gets out, and of course that I'm sure has a trickle down impact on a lot of social service related nonprofits such as the Furniture
Mm-hmm.
Bank. Can you talk a little bit about how that has or hasn't affected you? And if it has affected you, how are you pivoting to deal with it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I like you, I try to avoid the politics of it. I try to stay focused on just the raw facts. We don't get any direct funding from the federal government, but we partner with about 80 agencies that we serve. And those agencies pay us a small fee to serve them. And we've now lost at least 4 agencies from that list and over 100,000 in revenue that we've been told of just in the last few weeks that has been directly cut by executive orders. And so this is money that has historically, been flowing from the federal government through these agencies out into the community through partners like us. To make sure that folks in our community have some of their basic needs met. And so, so that's a direct impact that we know is happened. And these are folks who are helping, refugees. These are folks that are helping homeless. These are folks that are, helping those who are senior citizens and on fixed income. So it's a number of different agencies that have been directly impacted by these federal orders. And then the other thing is that we know just broadly in Central Ohio, there's $150 million that was cut directly from executive orders. And so that's $150 million that was coming here to Central Ohio every year to help care for our community and the folks in our community. And to have all of that money cut immediately, just think about the gap that provides or the gap that leads here in Central Ohio. That's not a gap that state and local funds or philanthropic community can fill. That's a gap that ultimately results in cut services. And so, politics aside, that's going to have a real impact in our community. That's jobs, that's not just the folks who are being served, it's the folks who are serving them that are going to be impacted by that. And so, we can argue and discuss, the merits of these decisions at a federal level without really thinking about the downstream impact, the literally thousands of lives that are now disrupted as a result of those decisions.
Well, I know that you're part of a cohort of human services organizations, the Human Service Chamber of Commerce. Shout out to Michael Corey there, who leads that group. Are you all talking to each other about this change in the funding environment? Are you working together somehow to try and make sure that as few people fall through the gap as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the benefits of having a group like that is there's about 200 or so agencies that work together through that organization. And so we're connected, we're pulling together and we're looking for ways, that we can best fill the gap and do it as efficiently as possible. But know that, the gap needs to be filled, otherwise, the already increasing homelessness population here in Central Ohio, that number is just going to skyrocket if it isn't for agencies like us who are helping come alongside of those folks. And so, yeah, we're doing, everybody's doing the best they can. and there is lots of conversations about how we can work together and be more efficient. And I think, again, maybe one of the positives that's going to come out of this is that there's going to be maybe some agencies that have duplicated services that they're going to be able to say, hey, we need to come together and maybe merge or collaborate so that we're not overlapping each other's services, but we're, maybe expanding each other's ability to serve by doing it together.
That's all the time we have today. But be sure to tune in next week to hear the next part of this exciting conversation. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider. I'm your host, Tom Dauber. Thank you for joining me as we journey together towards major gift mastery on the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast.